welcome to another episode of Real Talk. Today is very special to me. I have with us and the OG Culture Vulture from the Emmy Award winning Bravo show Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, Emmy winning host, Mr. Jay Rodriguez. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. This is really great. I really appreciate it. Yeah, we met a few years ago, and I never thought that this would be something I'd be doing right now. So I really appreciate it.
The world.
So first of all, how are you holding up during all this stuff, the pandemic and?
In the beginning, I think there was a lot of waves of uncertainty and anxiety about how to move forward. And once I think there was a lot of hope in the beginning that we wouldn't be in lockdown very long. But as the information started coming out and you kind of understand the grand scope of it all, I kind of got into my head, okay, we're here for a minute. And so I had to kind of get a little bit more resourceful and a little innovative at home and figure out ways to work from home and to still stay virtually connected to friends. And I think now, this far in, I feel like a sense of balance with it all. It's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's certainly something that I'm learning to live with, but it's at times very overwhelming.
Right. One thing I noticed, because I follow you on social media, you haven't let much grass grow under your feet. You're always busy. You're always doing something. You're trying, and I really admire that. Because you're
It's
always
been my
working.
way. I wonder if it's because I grew up poor. I'm a gig worker. Sometimes I'm working and sometimes I'm not. And so I think the anxiety for about lack of stability or the lack of the unknown keeps me active, and it keeps me sort of grounded to kind of keep pushing forward in the most unlikely of times.
Right, right. And you're doing really well. You bring some joy to some of these crazy days and truth, honesty. You're just a really open person, and I really appreciate that. It's like you're not putting on airs is what I've noticed. When I met you in person, you were the same guy that was on television, and you're just still the same person. And I really like that. It's
Is I just had a birthday this summer and I feel much more like a grown up, and I think, but ultimately I just reunited with my Queer Eye Boys for a project that'll air next year, and in that I kind of realized there's so many pieces of me that are quite similar to our time together 17 years ago, but also some pieces that have evolved in ways that I think maybe are a little surprising for my cast, and I'm thankful that they allowed room for that, because we were part of something that was very time intensive. Technology back then, it took forever to shoot a show and to rig the car and all these things, and so we were together. Our first year, I think we shot 52 episodes within 56 weeks, so it was a really, really fast moving, intense, long hour experience, as opposed to the new guys. I believe they're together like 3 months out of the year. I mean, to be honest, I'd prefer that schedule so you can go pursue other things, but we didn't have the luxury of that working in cable as opposed to streaming. But I gotta say, it's interesting to see like how there's a lot of pieces of myself. I'm like, I'm all grown up now, but then I get in relation to my family, aka my Queer Eye Boys, and I feel all the kind of primal parts of me come out that are just real and raw and unapologetically so.
right. It's the strength in numbers. You get to really, especially when you're comfortable with someone and you've been with them for so long that you can be yourself, and you can even make mistakes, and your friends and the people that love you will just say, oh, that was cool, but I still love you no matter what.
We're not around each other a whole hell of a lot.
Right.
I haven't spent quality time with my guys probably since we left the show 14 years ago, or the show wrapped, I should say. And we really haven't spent as a group quality time. No, that just didn't happen the past 14 years. Individually, sure, here and there.
Right.
But I think it was a really beautiful blessing to be able to kind of go into it. I had no idea what it would be like, if it would all come back, if I would be encountering strangers in a sense, because over a decade has passed. And but no, it was actually very familiar, and it was actually quite interesting to see what pieces of people have stayed exactly the same, what pieces have evolved. It was just interesting. It was like, honestly, felt like a family reunion because, I can't get rid of them.
Mhm.
Um, and you don't pick your family, your family picks you. And I think
Mhm.
it was a really serendipitous pick because
Right.
I've done so many TV shows since, and I've never had that kind of chemistry since.
Yeah, it was so good. At the time that the show came out, I really needed some kind of uplifting message from, especially from the gay community. And when you five showed up on that TV, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? They're using the word queer. We're taking this back, and it was just so important at the time.
Yeah, that was an issue at first. A
Mhm,
lot of people, season one, before we aired,
mhm,
wouldn't work with us. Major companies wouldn't work with us because they didn't want to be associated with the word, fearing that their customers would be turned off by it.
mhm.
And then once people saw the show, their tone quickly shifted. But it was interesting because it was a big leap for many of us to be out publicly,
Yeah.
and certainly me as an actor, I know that the industry still has a certain bias against
Mhm.
out gay men, so it's interesting, but I think times are um, changing in the sense that there are folks who hire people based on the work, not
Right.
necessarily what they know about their personal lives.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Also, I'm not sure, but was that a scoop that there's something happening with you five that maybe you can't really?
Absolute scoop. We reunited for a network show. It's not Bravo. It's nothing to do with the original Queer Eyes. No one who did anything on Queer Eye was involved with
Mhm.
this, or making the show rather. But it's just a one-off kind of special that reunites us, and it's an active special. So we're not sitting on a couch with a moderator. It's not that kind of show, and I think we actually like that better. We like kind of being able to do our own thing, and I think all of us after this experience would be very happy and open to the possibility of possibly reuniting to do something different
Mhm.
together other than Queer Eye, because I think the Queer Eye show that exists now on Netflix is perfectly cast, and
Mhm.
they're successful, and they should carry that torch. And I think for us, we kind of done it, and I think we'd like to see what else is out there for us as a unit.
Exactly. Yeah. So you answered my question. I was going to ask you how you felt about the new Queer Eye, and you just answered that. Yeah.
Listen, I think it's a different era. Of course, I'm jealous of their salary. I'm jealous that they have social media,
Right.
which is an instant way to connect with fans, but
Mhm.
also at the level they have it, they can also monetize it. And someone like me who's a gig worker and maybe kind of, Billy Porter says this great quote, which I've been paraphrasing a lot lately. He says that when you're a trailblazer, you don't get to reap the benefits the same way that those behind you get to reap the benefits. You kind of get hit hard with a lot of obstacles and a lot of
Mhm.
no's, and you can do something for the first time, and then everyone behind you gets those opportunities. But I think we're in a kind of a mixed bag with that right now for the Queer Eye guys because of
Mhm.
the resurgence of the show. There was also, well, whatever happened to the other guys?
Right.
And so suddenly there's been a lot of opportunities for us as a unit. But yeah, I think they are charming, they're sweet,
Mhm.
they're very, very I don't want to say respectful. That sounds like I'm diminishing how they've been. They've been very classy. One of the key tenets of the show was style, taste, and class, which
Mhm.
always sounded like elitist to me because growing up eating off paper plates and plastic utensils, I didn't necessarily feel like that language spoke to all folks who'd be
Mhm.
viewing the show. And I think style is personal. Fashion and can dip in and out of trends.
Right.
But I also feel like, you know, part of this whole style, taste, and class thing, um, for me, is just making it your own wherever you're at.
Mhm.
And so, I certainly wish I had the social media following and all that stuff, but I will say that namely because I think out of all of us, all 10, probably the only person who never got like some $1 million endorsement
Right.
deal in the early 2000s, being brown and being
Mhm.
queer and being presenting as feminine sometimes while
Mhm.
presenting as masculine other times. I often was told or just would see in a reply all email that it was unmarketable, and that
Mhm.
people wouldn't take to me. However, there's an expression in television called a Q rating. It's
Mhm.
basically it's a measurement of how audiences receive you, and my Q rating was always high, and so it was interesting to me how I could never align kind of my success or popularity on the show with anything tangible like a book deal or all these other things. I think it was a tricky era where we've come a long way now, where the
Hmm.
boxes of diversity I check and how I identify who I am authentically, there's a
Right.
lot of room for that.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, in the early 2000s, it just wasn't that vibe. So I'm thankful that it busted down the gay door.
Hmm.
And in years since, we've been really working, I think, as a community to make sure that there's space for everyone under the acronym, the LGBTQIA
Right.
plus community, you know?
Exactly. It was for me when I saw you, especially being Puerto Rican and watching you on that. It was like, wait a minute, a queer Puerto Rican guy who's just he's taking it by storm from the outside looking in, and
Like the crazy thing is now talking to you, I'm
mhm,
reminded of some of the things that were monumental. We did
yeah,
like for instance, we made over the Jay Leno show, and we did it over the course of 2 days. Like I don't think he'd ever done anything like that.
no,
So we got there on
mm,
a Thursday, did a whole like thing as if he were the straight guy, and Friday was the big reveal. That was kind of massive. And even Ellen and Kevin Williamson created Scream and Vampire Diaries and a
right,
bunch of amazing horror things. And obviously everyone knows Ellen. They threw us like a screening party for our reveal on Leno on the Tonight Show at Kevin's house, and that
wow,
all these gay celebrities were there. And at the time, in the 90s and the early 2000s, people were heavily closeted, so all they really
right.
had were their safe group of friends, and to be welcomed into that was really exciting at the time. I should have taken everybody's cell phone number because now I don't got a way to reach out to these people, but yeah.
Gosh, we have a few things in common. We're both from New York. I'm half Puerto Rican and Italian on my biological father's side. But what's interesting, I was doing research for you, and I was looking up famous Puerto Ricans. You're on the list with my father, and
Wild.
I was just, wait a minute, what? He since passed away in the '70s, and his career was it died down early because he was a teenager, one of the original teenagers. So he wasn't a teenager anymore, and his career had to change. But he's still on that list, and I'm like, wait a minute. So yeah, so you are very iconic, and I know people say that use that word a lot for some people call him a diva or iconic, but the Fab Five, the original, are so iconic. You started a movement, and you opened the door for
You know
us to
what's
see
funny,
ourselves.
interesting? Like we didn't intend on it. Like we all had professions. I was,
Mhm,
starring on a show in New York on Broadway, and then I had taken a 6 month leave to do an off Broadway musical. But I was going to go back to my Broadway
mhm,
show, and during the time I was doing the off Broadway, this audition came up for this show that really had no clear cut definition or explanation as to what exactly it was because there was nothing like it. So they couldn't
mhm.
say it's kind of like because there was no reference.
Right.
And all I knew is I had to be out. I knew there was a makeover element to it. And, kind of working in theater, you're used to transforming all the
Mhm.
time. So I
Right.
think from hair, makeup, and costumes, all that stuff made sense to me. Setting up events, all that stuff kind of was in the flow of my life. But we didn't know it was going to be a cultural phenomenon globally because the show aired in over 190
Right.
countries. We didn't know that, we would triple Bravo's ratings ever on our second episode, I think it was. And within 2 weeks, Oprah, Ellen, Jay Leno, Variety, Vanity Fair were on the cover of Entertainment Weekly within 2 weeks. And
Right.
these massive photo shoots, and just coming from humble beginnings, that was all very overwhelming to me.
Mhm.
And trying to just kind of keep my head above the water because our show was time intensive. Everything seemed possible back then, yet everything was overwhelming. And
Right.
so it's tricky when I look back now. I see how it felt like I was the Tasmanian devil, and I didn't get moments to really just like and like
Right.
take it in. It's
Mhm.
now years later upon reflection that I can be like, wow, that was a big deal. Or I can think about, we were presenters at the VMAs and gave Beyonce her first solo award for,
Well,
best female music video. And like that's like, and being backstage with her multiple times and getting on a first name basis and she's like, hey Joe, I'm like, oh hi, and like hugging, again, she wasn't the Beyonce now. Like this was
right.
her first thing right out the gate after Destiny's Child. So it was just a different time. But I think what the thing it taught me was that I met all of my giant, the giants that I admire and hung out with many of them. And I just was like, oh, we are literally all the same. Some people have more visibility than
Mhm.
others. Some people get talked about more than others. But at the end of the day, we are all quite similar,
Yeah.
in our desires and our um and the core things that kind of move and drive us.
Hmm. That's great. Yeah. Also, I know that we also have this in common. HIV has um, come into our lives in ways that we don't want it. I've been positive for half my life, 58 years old now, and I know that. And I've also lost a sister and some family members to it. And I know for that you also lost your sister. So,
Aunt, my mother's sister,
yep.
and she was the first
Oh,
person
and
to
I'm
ever
sorry.
bring.
I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's my aunt. It's okay.
Your aunt. I'm sorry.
Um, yeah, it's all right. My aunt, who was like the fun party aunt. My mom there was 6 kids in my mom's family. There's 3 girls, 3 boys. The eldest, the middle daughter, my aunt Joanne, her husband, cheated mid-marriage, and died of what we were told cancer. Now we know it was,
Hmm.
you know, uh, AIDS-related complications due to a
Hmm.
cancer. And then you have to think about in the 90s, and I'm sure you know because as active in the community as you and I both are, there weren't a lot of clear-cut answers, and certainly us living in suburbia on Long
Hmm.
Island, coming from a
Right.
low-income situation, when you look at doctors, you're so trusting.
Hmm.
And my aunt went to Stony Brook Hospital, Long Island, which is also a teaching school.
Right.
And so we believe that we would see so many. It was my aunt and one of her 2 kids that was in the mid 90s. At that time, had full blown AIDS. Was past the point of being positive, and
Mm.
it was very tricky for my aunt to try to find. Uh, Resources and also more importantly to understand what worked, what didn't work. All she
Right.
would see was little kids dying rapidly. The kids would always
Right.
go first.
Yeah.
And so she made a very tough decision to pull herself for what she believed was a medical trial that had her on placebo because she was getting worse, not
Oh,
better.
okay.
And so then my cousin passed first, and then my aunt. And then I'm 16, maybe 17 when that happened. And a year and a half later, I get Rent. And not only am I playing a gay character, but I'm playing an HIV positive drag queen that dies in the show,
Wow.
in a time where I had no reflection as to what gay meant. I really did think I was
Mhm.
the only one who had these emotions and these feelings because I didn't see it reflected in cinema. I knew that it was a slur, that gay things were a slur.
Mhm.
Comedically, I just was like, what do people do? Just sword fight? And I was like,
Right,
it's
right.
certainly not, you're not going to put things where poop comes out. Like I had no,
Right, right.
the internet was new, and you had to be rich or, to have a computer or like go to school, and you're not going to Google gay sex at school.
Right.
So I really didn't know it was a thing, and I just certainly didn't know how it went down. So in many ways, me disclosing that I had booked Rent to my mother and unpacking the character was me defending the character and also kind of on the sly using that as an unspoken way to come out, because the
Mm.
exchange kind of went like, oh, so what, you're like that now? And I was like, I don't know what I'm like, and it was this whole kind of saying it but not saying it. And in Puerto Rican families, there's a lot of layers. You have the religious layer, you may have also the cultural layer, the surroundings in which people grow up in, and the views that people have around it. And even to this day, while I'm an HIV advocate, I'm
Mhm.
the only one in my family. They lost a sister, they lost an aunt, that they
Mhm.
lost a cousin, whatever, and people don't speak of it. There's great
Right.
shame
Mhm.
around the stigma of it, that still exists, and
Yeah.
that's over 20, what is it, 20, 4 years later.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one reason why even in the beginning when I was told that my basically pack it in, your life is over, get it together, I did not keep quiet. And I remember my dad, Al, was like, Gregory, they call me Gregory. Whole story. You need to be quiet. You need to not tell anybody about this because they were worried for my safety. I'm already dealing with this, and my dad's in the medical field. He was a pharmacist by trade, a pharmaceutical salesman for Eli Lilly, and so he knew a lot about medications and stuff like. And he was one of the first people to say that the AZT was not going to be good for me. I don't know how he knew. And as soon as I took one pill, I ended up in the hospital. I thought I was going to die. My hair was going to explode. So for the first 2 years, I had nothing to take. There was nothing for me to take. So my go-to thing was to eat everything I wanted to eat, drink everything I wanted to drink. Unfortunately, do everything I needed to because I didn't want to go to sleep. And
You weren't alone in that, and I think that's that kind of like, in some way, that kind of it must have been soothing, and it must have also been felt like self-care, because in a world that
Mhm.
doesn't see you, in a world that is speaking ill of you, and you see it in the news and the way it's slanted and it's used as derogatory,
Right.
and it's spoken about in a derogatory way, and certainly in the 80s having a president who wouldn't even say the word. I mean,
Uh,
all these things can trigger you to the point where you just want comfort. And I'm
mhm,
telling you, people that get it from the bottle, they get it from a
mhm.
bag of something. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, people get it where they get it. That's why I don't judge people, because even though this pandemic, COVID-19 is quite different,
Mhm.
there's some crossover for a lot of people.
Right.
You feel isolated, you feel shame based, you don't know who has it, you have to behave
Mhm.
responsibly, but what does that even look like? And so, I'm finding myself using a lot of the same language that I did in the early 2000s,
Right.
pre-prep and everything,
Right.
where you're almost doing risk management,
Mhm.
and you're trying to take all the vital and necessary precautions to move your life forward, while
Right.
also in the back of your mind thinking, okay, I need to be mindful. But the thing, Briscoe, if I can say, the thing that really, like, the thing that, I'm not an aggressive person, I'm
Mhm.
not. But one of the things that makes me my blood boil and would make me want to fight someone is if anyone casually tries to disrespect someone who is living with HIV. Here's why.
Mhm. Right.
I remember being at a dentist's office. I was 16, got my learner's permit, had to take my aunt to the dentist.
Mhm.
Now, my aunt was a good Christian woman. Okay. She got the 2.5 kids, the house, the boat. Her
Right.
husband died. She had some
Oh.
coin, not a
Mhm.
lot, but he was a vet. And so she was living off that and also working. So she had a nice life.
Mhm.
Born again Christian. We went to a great church. The minute, the minute that people found out at the church, because it's your church, right? We went to one of
Right.
those mega church. It was a
Mhm.
mostly white church, to be
Mhm.
honest. We were one of a handful of families of color. And the minute they find out, this woman came up to me and she said, hey, I was just thinking about Sister Joanne. You know, I think she's just not calling out to God, enough. And I think just tell her to keep crying out to him, because he's going to heal her. She's just not crying out to him. And I remember, as a student in high
Mhm.
school, knowing learning in school, the fullness of what the virus is, how it impacts you, how it impacts the
Right.
body. you
Mhm.
know I was very well versed, as well as being in frequent doctor meetings and all that kind of stuff, so that angered me. I can almost understand that level of ignorance in 96, especially
Right.
my Mr. Eastman, my history teacher, when we had one of those seminars where everyone has to go to the auditorium, and it's
Mhm.
usually people who are positive sharing their story to kind of say, hey, it could happen to you.
Mhm.
And we all got up to go, and he's like, no, 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 you guys are not going. You're not going. That is for faggots and IV drug users.
Wow.
Okay. Oh, and then the classroom made that sound,
Oh
and
my
then and then he said, what? Okay, fine. If you are homosexual and you put your penis inside a man's asshole, then
oh,
you can get up and go. And if you're an IV drug user, you get your ass out of here too. That's what he actually said as my aunt was going through it. So they're one of the key lines in Rent. It's a whole song. It's
mhm.
called Will I. The
Oh, yeah.
lyrics are, will I lose my dignity? Will someone care? Will
Mhm.
someone wake me? Will I wake tomorrow from this nightmare?
Mhm.
And, I experienced the stigma because I had a relative
Mhm.
who was going through it. Years later in 2020, if you're going to be on prep and
Mhm.
have the gall to say anything at brunch, whatever, whatever, about someone who's positive, or you would never hook up with someone who's positive,
Mhm.
even knowing now what we know
Right.
about U equals U, which is, for those who don't know that,
Yes.
those who are positive and have an
Mhm.
undetectable viral load, meaning
Right.
that they're on medication and there's not enough virus to even spot in a microscope,
Right.
you can't pass it on.
Right.
And that's how a lot of people are living and thriving. And I mean, you can't pass it on, even if you decide to have condomless sex with your
Mhm.
partner, which is your choice. And that's where we are today.
Right.
So this whole idea of stigmatizing people living with
Mhm.
HIV, it it is like, I cannot help but personalize it. I cannot
Right.
help but take it personal. I
Mhm.
cannot help but be infuriated by the ignorance. We had an entire generation wiped out, and we've had
Seriously.
millions upon millions of dollars. Everyone's gone to some benefit or gala or walk
Mhm.
or fundraiser for what? To get us
Right.
the medicines and the treatments that we have today so that we could remove the stigma and
Right.
get our heads to where we are today.
You're right. You're right. And yeah, yeah, I just can't live with in secret. And I've always been very open. And people, like I said, people are like, wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't say. No, I don't care. I don't care. If you like me before you find out, and then you find out I'm positive, and you don't want anything to do with me, then more go away. I don't really need you in my life. So it's like,
I think it's their loss, and I
yeah,
think I've had a lot of friends, and this is before PrEP, who would date. I can't remember if it's called zero convergent. I can't remember the label when one
right.
partner is positive, one isn't. There's a term for it, but I
Hmm.
met many friends of mine who one
Yeah.
was positive, one wasn't, and they navigated through it quite safely.
Hmm.
And now that we have such great preventative methods, we
Right.
have the fact that if someone adheres to their medical regime, that they could, or their regimen rather, um, they can get to a place quite easily that keeps them undetected, and it keeps them
Absolutely.
safe, and it
Yeah.
keeps them, their partners, safe. And so to discriminate against folks or even use any kind of language that would make them seem like they're less than is a personal attack, I think, on the work of our ancestors
Hmm.
and the people who came up before us. It's spitting on their grave, and I won't have it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That makes me feel really good to know that we have true allies out there that uh, are on the side of right. It is really important to have people that are not positive to speak up and say things. Yeah, because we're in the same boat. Back, it could be turned around. So, so let's.
No.
You never know. You never know. So let's talk about some cheery stuff. So what's next? What's up with for Jay
Yeah,
next?
so I'm really excited because after I chat with you, I have to make a video for HBO Max, which is a new streaming platform
I
by
know. Yes.
HBO.
Yes.
And this is new show called Equal. And it
Hmm.
kind of touches lightly on some of the things that I was just referencing earlier, but it's about unsung queer heroes of the 1960s. Everyone knows Stonewall, which was
Right.
69.
Mhm.
But what the hell happened like the decade before leading up to
Right.
that? This show uses trailblazers and queer icons to tell the stories of real people that came before them. And we
Right.
all embody these people. For me, what was so interesting was my character is um, a drag performer who was very political and very popular.
You look
And
beautiful. You look beautiful, by the way.
thanks. And well, it was like definitely not drag by today's standards. So you
Yeah.
have to like, I wanted to be like all pretty and RuPaul like, but I was trying to, the makeup artist really wanted, and I was fully for it, matching the period and
Right.
what that
Mhm.
looked like. And there was very deliberate reason why at that time there wasn't like trying to pass, because
Okay.
it was illegal to dress as a
Right.
woman. You had to have two articles of men's clothing on at all
Mhm.
times.
That is
And then
correct.
the police would come and raid these bars, and sometimes it would get quite bloody. And
Mhm.
that was happening before Stonewall. So anyway, so he was a champion who really spoke out, and he has a sort of mid-Atlantic accent. Do you know how like drag queens can have people that they emulate, or they're their icons and they want to be like them, like Shangela, maybe it's Beyonce. Well,
Right.
much like that, Jose Sadia, or as he was also known, the Widow Norton, and I'll unpack that because that's a funny story.
Okay.
Would yeah, would probably like the 1950s film stars, and so Jose spoke with this. He kind of talked like this. It was
Yeah.
very like Jose's voice is very in here, and it was in the mask, and in the way he talked was mid-Atlantic. And I see these homosexuals coming in here on the street wearing their suits during the day and having sex at night with men, and yet they won't vote for that. Like it was that and getting that into the body and just kind of listening
Oh.
to as much footage and hearing as much audio and watching as much footage as I could get my hands on, and also speaking to his successor. So basically what happened was a lot of drag queens at the time in the 60s in San Francisco. So some of them were like, I don't want to be a drag queen. I want to elevate myself. Was better than a drag queen? An empress. So
Oh.
there was like a bunch of empresses, but then Jose was pissed because there was like a whole bunch of empresses at that time. So then Jose did something very clever. There was this sort of famous eccentric in the 1800s who moved to San Francisco and like printed his own money, and he was like a total kook, but he's buried in a public park, and his name
Oh my
was
God.
Edward Norton. And so she thought, how can I separate myself from all these other bitches, basically. And was like, I think Jose actually says that in one of the videos. And she said, I know, I'm gonna be a widow. I'm gonna be the widow Norton. And so she started calling herself that and telling people that she was the widow, which time wise just wouldn't
It
work
would
because he
work.
had died, she was died before she was born, whatever. But one day they were like, you know, Jose, maybe you should go visit your husband's grave if you're really gonna commit to this whole gag. So she went in like a black limo, like with a veil, and brought flowers to her husband's grave. Well, you can't do that at this private park. So they stopped them, but they were so tickled that
Right.
someone was coming to pay respects to this person, and there she was in high drag, and it's like the 60s, right? And so they were like, okay, I mean, do you want to come back? So the next year she came back and brought a whole bunch of people, and they made a thing, and they had donuts for them and everything. Now it's an annual event, and
Wow.
I think it became a fundraiser, and people would speak. She also started the Imperial Court, which was considered the largest fundraising LGBTQ plus organization of its kind, and it's still in existence with thousands of chapters all over. And that's all because of Jose. Jose was also the first out public official to run for office. Did
Oh,
not get the nomination,
mhm.
but got a good number of votes.
Right.
And so his legacy lives on. And I'm not being disrespectful by using the he pronoun, because all his friends, including himself, he does speak of himself as both he and she. He
Okay.
uses them interchangeably. So I did my research on that one too. But it was a great opportunity. So HBO Max, October 22nd, you
22nd.
will see a lot of familiar faces
Yeah.
telling stories of people you might not know that well. Maybe you heard something, but the shocking thing, Briscoe, is that you literally will hear it's during the civil rights movement, because the
Right.
LGBTQ movement there was some crossover with the
Right.
civil rights movement. And there's a lot of intersectionality with it, and a lot of the same things we're asking for today,
Right.
they were asking for back then. And I think that's going to really educate our generation, because unless we know where we came from, we sometimes can feel like we're the only ones, or this is a new concept. And I
Mhm.
think it emboldens you and empowers you to know that you are off on the shoulders of those who came before you,
Right.
when it was far less safe to
Oh,
speak out
seriously.
against the government, and you had the possibility of being attacked by police at any time.
Yeah, yeah. It's nuts how we're victims of violence a lot, and it's kind of shocking that not more is done. I mean, I was gay bashed in the 80s, really bad. I still have the scars here and on my shoulder, and nobody helped. Nobody said a thing. Nobody did anything to
Second
intervene.
class citizens,
Yeah.
second class citizens to some people. And I think that that's why I think we need to keep our elected officials, or anyone who is in a position of power, whether it's that influencer to the president,
Hmm.
in check with the dog whistle language, because
Seriously.
fear incites anger,
Hmm.
and anger incites violence. And so if you are taught and have deep rooted beliefs to believe an untruth about someone that makes you fear them,
Hmm.
and now you're scared of them, now you're angry that they're at your workplace, you're angry that they're
Right.
on your block. And where does that go? Many times, sadly, it gets to a violent space. And
Hmm.
so people who are like, I mean, I was just kidding, why can't I say that?
Mm.
Because there is a pattern there. And I think
Right.
it's very important, even though sometimes I'll make the record scratch. Some people don't like it, but I
Seriously.
do
Yeah.
it in a kind way. But
Hmm.
people are like, you're being too sensitive. I'm like, trust me,
No,
I'm not.
no, no, seriously. Just good. I used to let people get away with things, especially when I was younger. We moved around a lot, and we ended up in Indiana for 18 months. And it was very racist back then. We integrated a neighborhood. And there's certain times I would let people say certain things. And later on, I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't let him get away with that. I'm from New York City. Why am I doing this? It's just so I wouldn't make waves. And then after a while, I'm like, wait a minute, go back to your original self and make those waves.
I kept talking about this weekend with Carson, that I feel like he was the first person that unabashedly was so gay, in air
Mhm.
quotes, around people and in spaces that were troubled by it. But he didn't code, he didn't put on another persona
Right.
to allow them to get comfortable. He instead was authentic, and they respected his
Mhm.
authenticity, and he would check them if they needed to be checked.
Right.
But it was almost like him being authentic was an act of bravery and an act of rebellion to, whether it's this misogynist culture we live in,
Mhm.
or what, it means to be a strong man. That comes in many different forms.
Yeah, it definitely, yeah. So what else are you doing besides the HBO Max? That's the October 22nd. I know because you're doing a lot of work, so I'm sure there's something else you have in your
Yeah, I'm
pocket.
auditioning all the time. I
Mhm.
have a couple things that I can't share, but that'll be
Okay,
exciting. And then I actually go live every day on my verified Facebook page. It's just my
right.
name at Jay Rodriguez with a blue check mark. And
Mhm.
then I do like a happy hour, which is fantastic. I get to connect with people from all over the world. And then on Mondays, I do kind of like a musical Mondays. It's like being at a virtual piano bar. They
Yeah.
get to pick what I sing, which could be amazing or be totally embarrassing. I think last week they wanted me to sing "I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman" by Britney Spears. So of course I had to be like, I'm not a twink, not yet a daddy. So I do like, parody stuff. But then also I just launched my brand new website, which is called Jay's World, and it's Jay's World, like JAIS world
Okay.
dot pub, like where you'd get a drink. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, send me
Ninja.
links.
So jaysworld.pubninja.com, and it's basically like blogs and podcasts, interviews like this. I have an extensive aquarium collection that I am pretty hilarious about. Also, exclusive behind the scenes, never before posted things from different sets and shows. It's just basically a space where you can get access to me in a way that
Mhm.
doesn't feel as generalized as an Instagram or a Facebook. This
Right.
is deeper. This is, I share, my journey, the good, the bad, the tragic, the vulnerable, the open. There's a lot of things that have happened in my life that I often like keep close to my heart.
Mhm.
And I feel like sometimes there are moments where you're ready to share those stories. And so I put them all in Jay's World. So they're kind of like, in its own spot. And it's something exciting because it's challenging to, be innovative at home and just be shooting things on your own and trying to figure out how to edit things. And
Right.
um, but the most important piece of it is continuing to connect with others through my journey, and staying open and vulnerable and hoping that impacts others.
Great. I grew up with aquariums, so I love the fact that you have your aquariums and you're an animal lover. How many animals do you have?
Look, I have a cat. I have a 20-gallon long, which is divided into 4 compartments. Each compartment has a betta fish, plus
Oh yeah,
shrimp
because they can't.
and snails.
Mhm.
And then I have a tropical fish tank back here, which you can't make out, which is a 1950s television.
Oh, it looks. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so there's like tropical fish. Then I've got like a 2.5 gallon in the bathroom. That's on the female betta fish. 5 gallon in the dining room that has a female betta fish and shrimp. And then there's one in the kitchen that's like a hexagon kind of shape, and that one has a betta fish, a cory, which is like a small little catfish,
Mhm.
and a whole bunch of clear shrimp. It's cute. They're all. I think what's been really great, not being able to go outside or
Mhm.
interact as much in the world as I wish I could. I've kind of created my own aquatic worlds,
Right.
and it gives me something to do. I mean, if you anyone who's an aquarist or you have an aquarium, to make them look perfect and pristine, every day you gotta do something, and it
Yeah.
might only be like 5 minutes.
Mhm.
But like every day there's something to do. There's got maybe the dead plant, or you got to move something around, or
Yeah.
it's there's always something. And I actually really take pride in it. I like it, and it's also like my little dorky hobby. And I couldn't say I had a hobby, but people always say like, "What's your hobby?" And I'm like, I don't think I have one.
Right.
But this certainly falls under the hobby category.
Well, I'm great. I'm so grateful that you were able to be with me today. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we go?
Just if you've made it through the video, you've made it through our conversation this long, and you're still with us, then go ahead and follow me on all social media. It's just at my name with a blue check mark,
Absolutely.
because then I know you're really here for me, and I
Exactly. Yeah, and I'll put up
and
all the
also,
links.
yeah, and I respond to every message. I try to get back to everybody, which is sometimes a challenge, but
Mhm.
I think I'm in a space in my life where I can right now. Sometimes
Right.
when I'm busy, it takes a minute, but
Mhm.
I like that connection. I think in theater, right away if something works or doesn't, or if you move someone, or if they're laughing, you hear it. And then in TV or in social media, the only way you know is if people reach out. And
Right.
so I like that.
Well, I'm looking forward to HBO Max on October 22nd. and I'll let everyone know.
Third episode, so
It's the third episode?
because
Okay,
it's only 4 parts, and
okay,
I'm yeah, part 3, but start from the beginning because it's
yeah,
like I'm gonna sit there with my glasses, like my popcorn, just getting my education. And I think if you know LGBTQ plus people and our allies or people who want a window in and don't
mhm,
understand the struggle and think we're just being too much, let them watch this so they can
yeah,
understand our history and why we are very cautious about not going backwards.
definitely. Well, I appreciate it, Jay. Thank you so much. And to the audience out there, don't forget, if you like this, hit the subscribe button, the like button, tell your friends. And remember, if you have a dream in your heart and a plan, it's never too late. Can you dig it?